most people, some people here, but I don't think most people know that there was actually some Microsoft software in that Apple II computer. Do you want to talk about what happened there, or how that occurred?
Yeah, there'd been the Altair and a few other companies, actually about 24, that had done various machines. But the 77 group included the PET, TRS-80,
Commodore,
and Commodore PET, TRS-80, and the Apple II. The original Apple II BASIC, the integer BASIC, we had nothing to do with. But then there was a floating point one where, and I mostly worked with Woz on that.
Let me tell this story. So Woz, my partner, we started out with this guy named Steve Wozniak, brilliant, brilliant guy. He writes this BASIC that is like the best BASIC on the planet. It does stuff that no other BASIC's ever done. You don't have to run it to find your error messages. It finds them when you type it in and stuff. It's perfect in every way, except for one thing, which is it's just fixed point, right? It's not floating point. And so we're getting a lot of input that people want this BASIC to be floating point. And like we're begging Woz, please, please make this floating point.
Who's we? How many people are in Apple?
Well, me. Yeah. We're begging Woz to make this floating point, and he just never does it. You know, and he wrote it by hand on paper. I mean, you know, he didn't have an assembler or anything to write it with. It was all just written on paper, and he'd type it in. He just never got around to making a floating point. Well, this is one of the mysteries of life. I don't know, but he never did. And so, you know, Microsoft had this very popular, really good floating point BASIC that we ended up going to them and saying, help.
And how much was the, I think you were telling us earlier?
That was $31,000.
That Apple paid you for
the floating point BASIC. And I flew out to Apple. I spent 2 days there getting the cassette. The cassette tapes were the main ways that people stored things at the time.
Right.
And, you know, that was fun. I think the most fun is later when we worked together.
Well, what was the most fun? Tell the story about the most fun that was later.
And maybe later, not the most fun.
Let him talk.
I'm teasing.
Well, you know, Steve can probably start it better. The team that was assembled there to do the Macintosh was a very committed team. And there was an equivalent team on our side that just got totally focused on this activity. Jeff Harbers, a lot of incredible people. And we really had bet our future because on the Macintosh being successful, and then hopefully graphics interface in general being successful. But first and foremost, the thing that would popularize that being the Macintosh. And so we were working together. The schedules were uncertain. The quality was uncertain. The price. When Steve first came up, it was going to be a lot cheaper computer than it ended up being, but that was fine.
So you worked in both places, in both?
Well, we were in Seattle, and we fly down there.
But Microsoft, if I remember correctly, from what I read, wasn't Microsoft one of the few companies that were allowed to even have a prototype of the Mac at the time?
Well, what's interesting, what's hard to remember now, is that Microsoft wasn't in the applications business then. They took a big bet on the Mac because this is how they got into the apps business. I mean, Lotus dominated the apps business on the PC back then.
Right. We had done just Multiplan, which was a hit on the Apple II. And then Mitch did an incredible job betting on the IBM PC, and 123 came in and, you know, ruled that part of the business. So the question was, what was the next paradigm shift that would allow for an entry? WordPerfect, we had Word, but WordPerfect was by far the strongest in word processing, DBase, and database.
And Word was that was a kind of a DOS text.
All of these products I'm saying were DOS-based products, because Windows wasn't in the picture at the time.
Right.
That's more in the early 90s that we get to that. And so we made this bet that the paradigm shift would be graphics interface, and in particular that the Macintosh would make that happen with 128K of memory, 22K of which was for the screen buffer, 14K was for the operating system. So it was
14K. Yeah, 14K.
Yeah.
The original Mac operating system was 14K.
14K that we had to have loaded when our software ran. So when the shell would come up, it had all the 128K.
The OS was bigger than 14K. It was in the 20s somewhere.
I see.
So when we ship these computers now with, you know, a gigabyte, 2 gigabytes of memory. And nobody remembers. 128K.
I remember that. I remember paying a lot of money for computers with 128K in those days. So the two companies worked closely on the Mac project because you were maybe not the only, but the principal or one of the principal software creators for it, right? Is that right?
Well, Apple did the Mac itself, but we got Bill and his team involved to write these applications. And we were doing a few apps ourselves. We did Mac Paint and Mac Draw and stuff like that. But Bill and his team did some great work.
Now, in terms of moving forward, after you left and your company grew more and more strong, what did you think was going to happen to Apple after sort of the disasters that occurred after Steve left?
Well, Apple's fate hung in the balance. We continued to do Macintosh software, and Excel, which Steve and I introduced together in New York City. That was kind of a fun event. That went on and did very well. But then, Apple just wasn't differentiating itself well enough from the higher volume platform. And
meaning Windows, right? I mean,
DOS and Windows.
Okay, but especially Windows in the 90s began to take off.
By 1995, Windows became popular. The big debate wasn't sort of Mac versus Windows. The big debate was character mode interface versus graphics mode interface. And
Apple was in very serious trouble. And what was really clear was that if the game was a zero-sum game where for Apple to win, Microsoft had to lose, then Apple was going to lose. But a lot of people's heads were still in that place.
Why was that from your perspective?
Well, a lot of people's heads were in that place at Apple, and even in the customer base, because, Apple had invented a lot of this stuff, and Microsoft was being successful, and Apple wasn't, and there was jealousy and this and that. There was just a lot of reasons for it that don't matter. But the net result of it was there were too many people at Apple and in the Apple ecosystem playing the game of, for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. And it was clear that you didn't have to play that game, because Apple wasn't going to beat Microsoft.